Hi there. This is a virtual walkthrough of a workshop that we offered in the Writing Hub called Preparing for the Academic Job Market, General Strategies and Staying Well. So this is a workshop talk through, which means we've morphed the live synchronous workshop that we offered online via Zoom into a series of videos that you can watch at your own pace to get the same information, but outside of that live group environment. So I'll walk you through the workshop content, but just know that if you want to discuss these topics or want to get further information about this particular workshop topic, you can reach out to us at writinghub@ucsd.edu. You can also make an appointment with a grad writing consultant if you are an enrolled graduate student. But let's get started with this workshop topic, preparing for the academic job market. Before we start, I want to do a quick land acknowledgement because wherever you are, wherever you're viewing this from, UC San Diego is the institution that is bringing us together with this video. And UCSD was built on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. So I'd just like to pause now to acknowledge the land and the original people of the area where the university is located, even if we're not physically there now. And to remember that today the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and their cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. So let's acknowledge their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them for their stewardship. No matter where you are, you might look on this link to see whose land you're on. Okay, and with that, let's start the workshop. So in this workshop, this virtual workshop, I'm going to talk through 7 strategies for preparing yourself for the academic job market. I'm not going to talk through these now because I think they'll make more sense later. But before we get started, I just want to have a couple of quick disclaimers. This is a very general focused workshop designed to help lots of graduate students and postdocs, regardless of the discipline that you're coming from. But your discipline and the kind of research that you do and the particular practices of your research culture are really going to influence what goes on in the academic job market. So you do also need to seek out discipline-specific resources and support in your department, through your advisor or PI, or other places that are unique to your particular field. So just to note, these are still useful strategies, but they're generalist strategies. So take what's useful from these and just leave the rest. You're not going to hurt our feelings if you find some of these strategies not applicable to you or just not useful for where you are right now. And that's okay. Take what's helpful and leave the rest. So alongside this video, there's a companion worksheet that you might consider downloading so that you can participate in these free write activities. And the first free write activity is just to allow yourself to think. When you think about preparing materials for the academic job market, what thought comes to the top of your mind? So I'd invite you now to pause this video and consider this question and engage in a free write, which just means you write without judgment. Everything that you think is good enough to write. So pause this video and ponder the question and write down your answers. When you think about preparing for the job market, what thought comes to the top of your mind? No matter what you answered to that free write question, I want to tell you it's okay to feel vulnerable about preparing materials for the academic job market. And in fact, if some of the thoughts that came to the top of your mind evoked anxiety or overwhelm, maybe panic, maybe even procrastination or dread, that is totally okay. And in fact, it says nothing about you or your ability to go on the academic job market if you're feeling vulnerable or insecure about preparing these materials. It has to do with the nature of the rhetorical situation you are now facing, because you're now facing a situation where you have to prepare a lot of materials for this pretty intense process, and you've never done that before. So it's okay if your initial reaction is a little bit anxiety invoking. That's totally okay, and it says nothing about you. So I'm going to talk through a little bit why this rhetorical situation is on its own, regardless of your particular place, pretty confusing and overwhelming. So first of all, going on the market is a kind of culminating activity, and you've been in graduate school and or you've been in a postdoc for a very long time. And going on the market is this kind of pinnacle moment. It's this apex of your experience. A lot of what you've done for the last few years have been meant to get you to this point. So there's a lot of stakes in this situation, and that's okay. So it's also okay to feel vulnerable about the fact that this is high stakes because a lot of things have been leading you to this moment. In addition, all the work that you've been doing from the moment you entered grad school all the way to where you are now has been a kind of identity work. You've spent a long time, maybe several long nights trying to articulate who you are as a scholar, what your work is all about, what drives you in this field. And all of that has taken a long time to produce. Now we're in this culminating moment, and that careful, meticulous identity work that you've been doing this whole time is now about to come up for judgment and evaluation. So it's really easy to feel personal and a sense of personal stakes when you're preparing these materials. It's also really easy and understandable that you fear the evaluation of those personal materials because they are fused with yourself. This feels like your identity as a person, your identity as a scholar, and your ability to articulate these things in job market materials and therefore secure a job are all fused into one thing, one endeavor. And that's intense. So just know that that's okay. On top of all of that sort of messy personal and historical context of going on the job market, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of documents that go into these packets. So it's pretty daunting to think about preparing all these drafts, let alone making them any good. When you're working in those documents and you're preparing your statements and you're preparing this packet, remind yourself and be gentle with yourself that you have very limited exposure to these genres. It'd be one thing if they asked you to submit 3 potential research articles that you would want to publish, and maybe in your discipline they do, but that would be totally different because you're engaged with those genres so much more frequently. Instead, you're asked to produce genres that you're not used to working in. You're not used to reading them. You're certainly not used to writing them. And so it's okay to think about the statements by themselves and start to get worried of like, what is this? How am I going to do this? Because you don't have a lot of familiarity with those genres of writing. And as you work on those unfamiliar genres, remember, you don't often think about yourself in these ways. So for example, if you've been engaged in teaching, chances are when you were working on your teaching, whether that was teaching a class or being a TA, you weren't doing things in that class because you thought you would put it on a teaching statement one day, right? You were doing it because you had students in need, you had to create resources, you had to create class material, you had to do some kind of lesson planning, you had to be prepared day to day for the students in that class. But now you're in a situation where you have to write this teaching statement genre, and you have to draw on those experiences that you had in that class. So even though you weren't thinking about your teaching statement when you were doing those things, you have to apply a kind of retrospective lens on the experiences you've already had, which you're not used to thinking about in this kind of rhetorical manner. So that's just confusing, and that creates a lot of confusing frustration for people, but that's okay. And it's also okay to remember that when you're working on these statements, it's totally legit to apply retrospective insight to your past experiences. It's okay if past you didn't realize that that's what you were doing, or that what you were doing when you were creating those discussion activities was engaging in active learning environments. It's okay if you apply that insight retrospectively to your previous experiences. That's legit. And then finally, it's important to remember that when you're preparing all of these materials and thinking about your experiences for this apex moment where your scholarly identity self is going to get judged on the market, that you don't know a lot about this audience. And yet that audience controls a resource you need. It's a resource that you absolutely need to have: a job, the ability to pay your bills and feed yourself. And so that all together, all of these different things is creating a very complex and high stakes rhetorical situation. And so if you're feeling some anxiety, or if you're feeling some frustration, or if you're feeling just some general weirdness about going on the academic job market, just know that it says nothing about you, that you feel that way. You are engaged in a very complex professional, personal, and rhetorical activity when you're preparing these materials. And it's the activity itself that's complex, and that's probably what's causing a lot of your feelings. And so that's important to remember. No matter where you're at with thinking about these materials, this is a really complex endeavor, and you should be proud of yourself for getting started. And so I want to pause and just say that you might have some feelings about what I just shared and what I just said. That's okay. Hold on to that feeling, snatch it, try to look at it and think, what is the reaction I'm having right now? And where does that reaction come from? I thought I was watching a video about strategies for the job market. Why are we talking about this? So I want to talk to you a little bit about how we think about strategies in the Writing Hub. And I want to remind you that your writing and your thinking are complexly intertwined, as we can see from these images. And you probably can remember many times when you were working on a piece of writing and you paused and maybe you looked up from your computer or you stared out your window and you let your brain do some work. Your writing and your thinking are complexly intertwined. Not only does your writing try to capture your thinking, what you're thinking also shapes what's available to you in writing. Your thinking is can drive your sense of what should be written, how it should be written, the kind of voice you want to capture, the kind of words you want to use. And so your thinking, remember, also includes a complex emotional backdrop. The emotional backdrop for your thinking is going to influence the content of your thinking, and the content of your thinking is going to influence the content of your writing. And so remember that all of this is interconnected. So taking care of your emotional and mental health as you're working on the job market isn't just a good idea. It will also produce better results in the form of your written materials and probably other aspects of the interview process. So in this workshop, we are going to explore not just writing strategies, that means words on page kinds of strategies. We're also going to explore thinking strategies, which is ways of thinking about yourself, ways of thinking about the market, ways of thinking about the materials that you're preparing. And all of that is meant to work synergistically as general strategies and helping you stay well in the academic job market writing process. And that brings me to strategy number 1, which is dealing with discomfort. All of this actually has been leading us to strategy number 1. All of that talk about why the job market is a complex rhetorical, professional, and personal activity has been leading us to our first strategy, which is, please do not internalize struggle or discomfort in this process as evidence of your inadequacy. It is absolutely not the case. What is the case is that you are involved in a really complex rhetorical situation, and that's going to take a little bit of work to navigate and is going to be uncomfortable. What's also true is that you are stretching yourself toward a professional position that you've never had. Think about it. How many of you have been faculty before? Maybe you're faculty now and you're an assistant professor going on the job market again. Great. But for most of us, we've never held the position of faculty. We are stretching ourselves to a new professional endeavor. And so you're going to start to feel that stretch right now as you start preparing your job market materials to get you to that endeavor. And I want to say that this is true of almost every professional, and regardless of field. Once they are stretching themselves towards an opportunity that they've never had, towards a position they've never fulfilled, they start to feel that stretch early on as they start to entertain the possibility of applying for those jobs, seeking those positions, and positioning themselves accordingly. So just remember, much like in an exercise routine, if you're trying to achieve a new physical goal, you're going to start feeling that work. You're going to start feeling it straight away. And that's exactly what's happening here. You're stretching yourself towards something. You're going to start to feel that stretch now. So all of this is to say, the discomfort that you experience in this process is normal and you should welcome it. Welcome it because it's evidence of the stretch. It's evidence that you're reaching towards something, that you have an aspiration that you're seeking to achieve. And in that sense, go toward it. If you find certain things are making you extra uncomfortable in the writing process for the job market, ask why. Go toward that discomfort. Try to see what it is about that particular aspect of the stretch that's giving you those feelings, because that will help you articulate your thoughts even more clearly. Don't run away from the discomfort. Go toward it, interrogate it, use it. And that also brings us to our second strategy, taking in advice mindfully. So I just want to say there's a lot of advice out there. And because you don't have a lot of experience with these genres, it's really understandable for you to Google or do other web searches for academic job market support and help. And a lot of those sources that you find online are going to cite many, many sad, dismal, really discouraging statistics and forecasts about the academic job market. And their advice is going to be rhetorically structured around those dismal statistics. Lots of academic job market advice is based on the presupposition that there is a lot of competition for a dwindling number of positions. This isn't exactly untrue. Some aspect of that is absolutely true, and there is a restructuring happening in higher education positions. That is a fact. However, when that is used as a rhetorical advice, or I'm sorry, as a rhetorical device in order to position a certain kind of advice in a certain kind of way with a certain kind of urgency, remember to take that in with a grain of salt, especially if this is advice that you have to pay for or support that someone is selling to you for a fee. Remember that folks who give these kinds of advice, who have this to sell, they need you to feel a sense of danger. They need you to feel a sense of impossibility and overwhelm in order to purchase their product, even if that product is consultation. And that's okay. You can purchase that product. Absolutely do so if you feel it will help you. But just remember that is part of a business model. And there is some truth to what they're selling, but it's not the whole truth. The result, of course, if you look at academic job market advice that is highly cynical or that tries to tell you there are rules that you need to follow, the result for you is you kind of end up like this. What is this animal? You end up like this octopus, sorry, from Dory, Finding Dory, where you feel like you have to bend yourself into the shape of something you're not or someone you're not. And so I want to say there are no golden rules or platinum rules or key set in stone rules for achieving success in these documents. There's lots of ways to write these successfully. And there's lots of different audiences for these documents. And what makes a document successful kind of depends on the audience. And therefore, because there's a variety of audiences, there's a lot of ways to do this well. And so you don't necessarily need to feel like you have to bend yourself into the shape of the advice that you find online. In fact, if that's the mentality you bring to the writing process, your writing might actually suffer. If you feel a sense of inauthenticity, or if you feel a sense of fear and that your statements need to do this performative dance that you don't believe in, you will probably write statements that are rather vague, inauthentic, obsequious, or performative. And by obsequious, I mean they're just overly sensitive to trying to prove your smartness and prove your worthiness. And there's just not a lot of confidence that is projected in the statement when it has that kind of obsequiousness. And so I say all of this not to drag any particular service or any particular set of advice under the bus. That's definitely not what I'm doing. My suggestion is that you take in that advice mindfully. And by mindfully, I mean also think about yourself and the kinds of emotions and reactions that advice instills and brings up in you, including the advice that I'm offering you in this workshop. Take in advice mindfully. Use what works for you, ignore the rest, and remember that you don't have to bend yourself into some pretzel-sized version of you where you are doing a kind of performance and writing about yourself in a way you just don't believe. You can and you should write statements that are authentic to you, that feel true and make you feel proud. The alternative, of course, of writing statements that a risk that you run if you write statements that feel completely fake to you is if you do get that job, you might be loaded with a lot of imposter syndrome, and you might have some imposter syndrome anyway by nature of your background. But if you write statements that you don't believe in and then you get the job, you might set yourself up to believe that you don't deserve that job. So you should try to write statements that feel accurate, that feel authentic, and that feel truthful and confident, that you are confident and you're proud of. You're proud to have those statements represent you. So in your companion worksheet, in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to do a free write related to this strategy of taking in advice mindfully. But first, I just want to pause and say, yes, there are a lot of truly dismal and frightening statistics out there about the academic job market. And that's certainly true now in the pandemic and in our post-pandemic world. I'm not going to deny that that's a reality. But let's consider the entire range of facts, or at least a wider range of facts. People are still getting faculty jobs. Those jobs still exist. Faculty are still retiring, creating space for faculty jobs. On top of that, people with PhDs are getting jobs all over the place. You can look and find PhDs in every corner of every industry. So even outside of the faculty track, there's lots of room for PhDs to do smart work in the world. Going on the academic job market, as we've explained, is a complex undertaking. This is a big task. And so it's okay to feel a sense of urgency, a sense of overwhelm, and a sense of dauntingness around this task. Don't internalize that. Remember, that was strategy number 1. It's also important to remember, and it's okay, that you don't control a lot of aspects of this process. There's many things, whether it's to the composition of the search committee, to internal dynamics happening in the department, to changes in your field that are shaping a direction of research, and maybe you are or aren't prepared to engage in that direction. All of that is outside of your control, and all of that is okay. Instead, direct your focus to what you still can control, which is writing impactful, authentic statements that waste no time showing how you fit. Remember that trying to game your materials to make them just exactly right probably is not going to help. It's probably futile, because when you're trying to game your statements and you're trying to hit all of the boxes and get it all exactly right, the statement is going to not be specific enough. It's going to be vague. It's not going to have a kind of confident tone or confident voice. And all of that is not great. So don't try to get your statements perfect. Don't try to game them so they hit all the right boxes. Try to write statements that are grounded in ideas that, again, feel authentic to you, feel accurate to you, and that you're proud to have represent you on the job market. Okay, so in your companion worksheet, I want you to engage in a free write. And so in just a moment, I'll invite you to pause this video and think through these questions. So the first question is, I want you to actually think about, what is the worst case scenario or outcome you fear about going on the job market? Allow yourself to think about that. Open up some mental space in your brain to entertain the idea that the thing you're most afraid will happen. Then think about what could be an unexpected silver lining of that particular outcome. If that scenario comes to pass, in what way might it be okay, actually pretty decent, not a bad outcome at all? And then in the third question, list out as many possible ways that you can think that you'll still be okay, even if that outcome happens. Nothing is too small or insignificant here. List out all of the ways that everything was still okay, even if that scenario happens. So at this point, I'd like you to pause this video and engage with these questions, and we'll come back in a moment. So you just engaged in this free write, and I would encourage you to look back through your answers or continue to think and reflect about what is coming up for you and how you feel about what you wrote in your free write and how it's making you feel continuously. Again, this is all part of the second strategy, taking in advice mindfully. And mindfulness starts with you and how you're feeling. So just be mindful of that. And you might be thinking now, why are we talking about this? This still doesn't quite connect. What I'm trying to get you to do with the free write, as well as with these two strategies, is to free up some of your brain space, free up your cognitive resources so that you can focus those resources on what you can control, writing impactful statements that are clear and authentic. So remember that your thinking and your writing are complexly intertwined. And so if you have emotional noise and self-talk, that's all going to turn the volume up in your brain, and it's going to make it harder to think clearly and carefully about what you want to communicate, and then it's going to make it harder to articulate what you want to communicate well and forcefully with impact. So free up some of your brain space by allowing yourself to think these thoughts and putting them away somewhere, knowing you can come back to them later, and engaging with the process with mindfulness. And with mindfulness, you'll free up some cognitive resources so that you can devote them to writing your statements well.